Hi, everyone. Welcome to SSDP's Just Say No peer education program. And our video today is going to be on the second lesson of the second edition of our training curriculum. And it's the listening, responding, and referral skills lesson. So my name is Vilmarie Faguada-Narlock, and I am the Director of Drug Education. That's my email right there if you ever have any questions about Just Say No or any of our other programs. And we have one member of our organization here joining me today, so I will let them introduce themselves in a sec. So the way that we're doing this lesson is a little bit different because we want you all to have a chance to work with each other. So if you are doing this lesson via webinar, I encourage you to maybe try and get a friend to do it with you, or take some time after you've gone through watching this video to meet up with a friend or a person you know to kind of go through some of these steps and go through some of this practice that we're going to be doing. So because we have just one person here, we're not going to do it the same way, but I would like for Nick to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick.
Hi, I'm Nick. I am an alumni of the SSDP chapter at Ohio State University, and I live in Central Ohio. I'm interested in the program because I've been invited to create like drug education programming for youth ministry in Columbus.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So for this lesson, what we would be doing is introducing ourselves, right, to at least one person you may not already know. Obviously, if you're doing this in a webinar format, you might have like your other chapter members with you. But either way, it'll give yourself a chance to talk about with each other why you're interested in our Just Say No program. And the idea being that you then are sharing with each other. So after you've kind of broken off into pairs, you can share with the rest of your chapter or the rest of the folks, your friends that you're with, who you've been talking to, who you are, who you've been talking to, and the reasons why you and your new friend want to be SSDP certified peer educators. It's a little practice in some listening skills, and we'll get into more of that in a minute. So the objective for this lesson is to overall understand listening skills and strategies, understand how to respond, particularly when we're thinking about folks who might come to us with difficult questions or who are kind of in challenging situations themselves, or maybe are concerned with a loved one, and giving us some strategies to kind of know how to respond to those sorts of things. Also to provide yourself with a kind of a gauge, a sense of when you might no longer be able to handle that problem and when it may be more appropriate to refer that person to another resource. And also, in that sense, being able to understand how you can do that and when to refer and connect a peer to resources. So the first thing that we talk about in this lesson is active listening. So active listening is essentially going to be a tool in your toolbox as far as communication is concerned. It's about giving your full attention, so keeping your eyes and your focus on the person that's speaking to you. It's being in the moment, being present, right? So not starting to think about what your response is going to be before the person is even done talking, before they're even finished with their own thoughts. Because what happens then is if you're kind of already thinking of a response, you're not actually listening. And your response might not actually be super relevant to what they're trying to share with you. You want to limit advice. So sometimes people might just need to be processing something, might just kind of need to talk through something to figure it out on their own, while you just sort of listen affirmingly. And of course, not interrupting, right? Interruptions can make it about you rather than the person that you're supposed to be listening to. It can also, particularly for folks who are trying to process something or who want to kind of talk things through, It can add kind of a challenge if you're interrupting them, and it might sort of throw them off track or kind of throw them off of their thought process, which can be a little annoying at least. So some strategies for active listening. Begin with encouraging. So encouraging helps to convey that you're interested in what the person is saying, and it kind of keeps them talking. So using neutral words and kind of varying your voice intonation can itself be helpful in this. So saying things like, can you tell me more? Or even like, what do you mean by that, to help them explore a little bit more of what they're trying to say. Clarifying then helps understand what was said, right? And it helps you gather more information and enables the person to maybe see other points of view. So asking questions and restating, sort of purposely restating wrong interpretations helps the person sort of focus and maybe explain further. So even something like, when did this happen? Can be a way to clarify. And asking something like, do you mean this? Can help clarify things. And restating, again, shows that you're listening and understanding what's being said and not misinterpreting. So restating basic ideas and basic facts from what they're telling you. So something like, if they're talking about an issue with a roommate, you might say something like, so you'd like your roommate to trust you more, is that right? And asking this in a form of a question is also really helpful, because what can happen is if by chance you aren't understanding, if you've maybe misinterpreted the situation, it gives that person an opportunity to either restate what they said and clarify what they said. So being able to restate, at least from your perspective, what they're sharing with you can also help that communication be more clear. Reflecting, again, shows an understanding for how the person is feeling, and it helps it helps them evaluate their own feelings. So after hearing a feeling maybe that they're expressing, so for example, you could say something like, you seem really upset that your friends didn't include you, if they're talking about a situation with a group of friends, something like that. So reflecting on that feeling that you're hearing, even if it's not something that they're explicitly stating in words, maybe something with their tone or their body language tells you that maybe they're a little sad or a little angry, and being able to use those words and kind of paraphrasing or summarizing in your own words your understanding of that can be really helpful. It helps them, again, feel that they've been listened to, helps them feel understood, and will also provide an opportunity for clarification or clarity if that was not exactly what was going on. Similarly, summarizing is another tool that you might use to review sort of any sort of progress or sort of what has been shared with you. It helps you pull together any sort of important ideas, important facts about what's been shared with you. And it establishes sort of a basis for any sort of further discussion. So restating the major ideas, including feelings. So something, for example, like, the main things I've heard you say are that you expressed so far are, and then kind of going into what that was. And again, that will help sort of the person sort of process. It helps them feel like they've been listened to, helps them feel understood. And again, if any of what you're summarizing is off point or not quite what they were meaning to share, that again allows for that opportunity for clarity. And lastly is validating. So validating acknowledges, basically the other person's worth, acknowledging the value of what they're bringing to you, acknowledging the value of their feelings, and it helps you show appreciation for their efforts and their actions. So even something as simple as, I appreciate your willingness to discuss this with me, or to share this with me, thanking them for sharing whatever this challenging thing might be that they're sharing with you. Because, as we all know, it can be really hard to be open and be vulnerable and talk to people about how we're feeling and about things that upset us or things that are challenging us. So being able to give that other person a little validation for even just doing that is really helpful. Okay, so this is where we're going to be doing a little bit of practice. So what I would want folks to do at this point is, again, if you have a partner or another person with you, you would pair up. One person is going to be the listener. The other person will be presenting a problem or an issue. It doesn't have to be anything like super personal for the sake of practice. You can make something up. Obviously, if you're using something that's real to you, that can help this practice be a little bit more real to you as well. So keep that in mind. The listener is going to be trying to use at least 3 of those active listening strategies that we just listed. And the other person, the speaker, is going to provide feedback to the listener about what that was like. Okay, so at this point, you're going to pause the video for active listening practice.
I like to practice listening.
Okay, great. I am currently, I've been trying to maintain a stable sort of sleep schedule because for me personally, I notice even like with a tiny little shift of anything in my sleep, it really impacts my ability to work and function during the day. So I've really been trying to go to bed at a certain time and get like 8 hours of sleep. And that seems like a lot, but that's really like I need 8 hours to function. Because I'll be tired during the day, or I'll be, just like kind of sluggish, and it's harder for me to focus on what I need to work on. So that's kind of a main issue or main thing that I've kind of been thinking about this week.
Okay. Yeah, so it sounds like you are trying to like stabilize your sleep schedule and your routine around that, because it helps you feel more productive. And I think that's like really responsible of you to be trying to get at least 8 hours of sleep a night.
Thanks. Yeah, it's like I said, it's been like a challenge for me. I tend to be sort of like my rhythm, I guess, tends to lean later. So I generally like to stay up later. But that is a challenge because like 9 to 5 hours for work, and I am not a 9 to 5 person. So I've been trying to go to bed by 11. Like that's that's my late limit, and getting up at around 8 o'clock, which is of course when a lot of people start work. But because I have a more flexible schedule, that ends up working for me. And so far it's been working pretty well. I've been able to, I have like a Fitbit, so that helps me monitor my sleep as well. Make sure that,
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So it helps me see how much I've been sleeping. So yeah, so far, so good.
I love that about it.
Yeah. So far it's been good. And I hope to be able to keep it up.
Yeah, it sounds like you're taking a lot of steps toward reaching your goal.
Yeah.
I definitely resonate with like tending to extend my day into like the later hours, even though I know that I need to get up earlier in the morning. So like finding that balance has been something that I've been vying with too.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah.
Okay, cool. As you heard, Nick did a great job of active listening. Let's see, I could point out a couple of things that I noticed that you did, Nick. You definitely did some restating. You validated. You summarized. And you did some reflecting. So you did at least 3 things, and I think you did them very well. So thanks for listening. Okay, now that you've had a chance to practice, we're going to move on to learn a little bit about motivational interviewing. And so this is a video that will kind of give us the breakdown of MI, which is essentially a set of strategies that we can use to help work with people, it really helps us with our listening skills as well. And you'll kind of be able to notice some of the similarities between active listening that we talked about earlier.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this brief introduction to motivational interviewing. I'm Dr. Bill Matulich, a clinical psychologist, a motivational interviewing trainer, and the author of the ebook, How to Do Motivational Interviewing, which is available, as they say, wherever fine ebooks are sold. So today I just want to share with you a brief slide presentation outlining the basic concepts of motivational interviewing for you. And the best place to start, I guess, is with a definition. So here's my definition of motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is an effective way of talking with people about change. So this is a simple definition. It's not as technical as a textbook definition, but I think it'll suffice for the simple introduction to motivational interviewing that I'm outlining for you on these slides. So what do I mean by effective? I mean that it's evidence-based, that motivational interviewing has about 1,200 publications or more in all kinds of prestigious journals covering motivational interviewing's use in a wide variety of problem areas, professional settings, and actually many different countries as well. So why is it even necessary to have something like motivational interviewing? Shouldn't people just naturally change their behavior when they know how important it is for them to change? Well, common practice would certainly suggest that this is the case. Oftentimes counselors will just give people information or advice and expect them to change their behavior. But professional counselors, change agents of one kind or another, know that change is not quick and easy. In fact, sometimes change is very slow and difficult. So what kind of changes am I talking about? Well, people face many decisions that require some sort of change at every stage of life. Children need to decide whether or not to do their homework, for example. People make career decisions and who to marry, how many children to have, when to have children, things like that. Later in life, difficult decisions include things like medical decisions, retirement, living alone or moving into a retirement home or senior living, for example, or sometimes just accepting help. People who have been used to being independent all their lives may have a difficult time making the change to just accepting the help that they need. But as I've mentioned before, these decisions to change are often very difficult. Occasionally, I'll ask my workshop students, for example, how long it was between the time that they knew that they had to make a significant change in their lives and the point at which they actually made the change. It doesn't surprise me anymore that many people say that it took 6 months or longer to actually make the change. So when change is hard, it's usually not because, or it's often not because, of lack of information or laziness or oppositional personality or denial or resistance or any of those kinds of things. Sometimes it is, a matter of lack of information. The person is already motivated and just needs some information. But oftentimes it's because it's a motivational issue. And when change is hard, it's sometimes because people are ambivalent. They're stuck in an ambivalent stage. And now ambivalence is just wanting and not wanting the change or wanting incompatible things at the same time. The problem with ambivalence is that it's uncomfortable. It leads to anxiety or produces anxiety. And anxiety, because we like to avoid anxiety, we oftentimes will procrastinate about making a change or making a decision in our lives because we don't like to be anxious. As a person gets stuck, though, in this ambivalent stage, continually procrastinating about making a decision, this oftentimes is mistaken on the part of the counselor for resistance. Now, in motivational interviewing, we don't talk much about resistance anymore. We don't use that word. But what is thought of as resistance, or what used to be thought of as resistance, is to a great extent simply ambivalence. Ambivalence is actually a natural condition of being unsure about making a change. It's a normal consequence about thinking about the pros and the cons of making a change. When people get stuck here, though, and change doesn't happen as quickly as the counselor thinks it should, it could look like the client is being resistant. So how does motivational interviewing help? Well, motivational interviewing helps by resolving this ambivalence and helping the person move towards healthy behavior change. It also helps by eliciting a person's own motivation to change, eliciting their own arguments for making a change. In healthy direction. So what are some of the underlying concepts of motivational interviewing? Well, the first one is the spirit of motivational interviewing, and this is described by 4 words. The first word is partnership, which refers to the fact that in motivational interviewing, the counselor and the client work collaboratively together, and the counselor avoids the expert role. The second word is acceptance, and this refers to the fact that the client respects that the counselor respects the client's autonomy, their irrevocable right to make decisions about their own lives, their potential, their strengths, and their perspective. We try to see the world through the client's perspective. Compassion refers to the fact that we keep the client's best interest in mind. And the last word is evocation, which refers to the idea that the best notions, the best ideas about change come from the client. Those are the ones that the client is going to act on much more readily than ideas that come from the counselor. So in order to do motivational interviewing, there are 4 skills that are necessary to master. These core skills are open questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. And these are nothing new to motivational interviewing or nothing unique to motivational interviewing. These are basic counseling skills that people have learned if they take a basic counseling class. Now, if you take the first letter of each one of these skills, it spells out the word Oars, and we use that acronym sometimes to refer to the 4 skills. We say that we are using our Oars skills. So here's some examples of some of the Oars skills. Open questions are questions, of course, that call for more than a yes or no answer. So this question up there, are you in pain, is not an open question, it's a closed question. A more skillful open question would be something like, how do you feel? How much alcohol do you drink a day is a closed question. That could be changed to, what role does alcohol play in your life? An open question. Don't you want to move to a safer place? Calls pretty much for a yes or no answer. What are the advantages that you see in moving to a safer place is an open question that calls for more of a discussion. In motivational interviewing, we try to ask more open questions than closed questions. We do this in order to encourage the client to talk about what's on his or her mind, rather than questioning the client based on what's on the counselor's mind or based on the counselor's agenda. The second skill is the skill of affirmations. Now, affirmations are simply statements about anything positive that the counselor notices about the client. Awards, attempts, achievements, accomplishments, prior successes, anything that we can point out to the client. Here's some examples of affirmations. You really care a lot about your family. This is hard work you're doing. You were successful in changing in the past. It took a lot of courage coming in today knowing that you had a dirty urinalysis. These can all be examples of affirmations. Now, we use affirmations in motivational interviewing to build a sense of self-confidence or a sense of self-efficacy. The third skill is maybe the most important skill in motivational interviewing, or the most important of the 4 core skills at any rate, and that's the skill of reflective listening. Reflections are simply understanding what the client is thinking and feeling and then saying it back to the client. Reflections are statements, not questions. Here's some examples of reflections. This is a person coming in to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder to a counselor, and he might say something like, I don't think that I have post-traumatic stress disorder. So a reflection might be, you're not sure about the diagnosis of PTSD. I've been this way for so long, I think it's just my personality. So all of this seems normal to you. Well, I don't like the road rage or getting angry with my wife. Road rage and anger at your wife are a couple of things you'd like to change. So you see that there are no questions there. Those are all reflections. Now, we use reflections in motivational interviewing to convey empathy and understanding, and especially to be able to start to see the world through our client's eyes. The fourth skill is summarizing, and summaries are simply long reflections of more than one client statement. Here's a woman thinking about moving to a retirement home or senior housing, something like that, and she's in the ambivalent stage, and she's making arguments for both moving and not moving at the same time. So she might say something like, I don't want to move, I like my house, I've been there for a long time, I'm worried about falling though, I'm a bit unsteady on my feet these days, but I'd have to change doctors and that would be a hassle for me. But if I move, maybe I could move closer to my grandchildren, I might be able to see my grandchildren more often, and I might feel safer in senior housing. So there's lots of different ways that you can respond to these statements that the woman is making, but if you wanted to summarize, the summary might go something like this. If I understand you correctly, you've been thinking of moving to senior housing. There's a downside in that you'd have to find new doctors and it would be unfamiliar. You also think you'd be safer in senior housing and could be closer to your grandchildren. And there's a number of different uses for summaries in motivational interviewing. The most important maybe is that summaries provide an opportunity for the counselor to become strategic and guide the client toward healthy behavior change by selectively summarizing the client's own reasons for change. Now, in motivational interviewing, there are 4 processes. There's engaging, focusing, evoking, and planning. And these 4 processes are somewhat sequential in nature, and that you have to engage your client before you can focus on a particular topic or behavior to change. You need to focus on that topic before you can evoke motivation. Then you have to have motivation before you can do any planning. So let's look at each one of these in a little bit more detail. Engaging is defined as the process of establishing a trusting and mutually respectful relationship. Now, this isn't unique or exclusive to the practice of motivational interviewing, but it just makes sense that you need some connection with your client before you can even begin to talk about the client changing their behavior. So other words that you may be more familiar with are attuning to your client, aligning with your client, joining with your client, establishing a therapeutic relationship, connecting with your client. All of these kinds of things refer to the same process in motivational interviewing. It's the process of engaging. Now, in motivational interviewing, it's just as important to know what not to do, what to avoid, as it is to know what to do. And nowhere is this more important than in the first process of motivational interviewing, the process of engaging. One of the things that you want to avoid then is the assessment trap, or assessing your client. Asking a whole bunch of questions right off the bat is off-putting. Your client is not really going to be engaged with you if that's all that you're doing is just asking a bunch of questions, and all they have to do is just sit there and answer question after question. That's not engaging to your client. So you want to avoid assessing your client right off the bat. Another thing that you want to avoid is telling your client how to fix their problem. So if you make a quick diagnosis, if the counselor makes a quick diagnosis and then offers a solution, this also is not going to be engaging. So you want to avoid telling your client how to fix their problem. A power differential is something else that may turn your client off in terms of the establishing a useful relationship. If you come across as some authority figure, for example, sometimes people don't really like that, and that may interfere with the engaging process. Labeling is something else that also may interfere, especially if you insist that the client accept the label before they can be helped in any way. So all of those are ways that that you can interfere with the engaging process and things that you want to avoid. So what is engaging? Well, anything that helps the client feel welcome, comfortable, understood. If you exceed your client's expectations, if your client feels that she and you have mutual goals, or if the client leaves feeling hopeful, then you've engaged your client in the process. Now, there's a number of different ways that you can do these kinds of things. For example, helping them feel welcome, just shaking their hand, using their name, pronouncing it correctly, these kinds of things. But one of the most important things is for a client to feel understood. The second process in motivational interviewing is focusing. Focusing is defined as an ongoing process of seeking and maintaining direction. Now, focusing involves setting an agenda or agreeing on an agenda. We set this agenda while considering the client's goals and priorities, as well as the counselor's goals and priorities, as well as the agency's goals and priorities, for example. And the whole purpose is an effort to create a clear direction for ultimately developing a change plan. So how the counselor accomplishes this is, again, with the use of the 4 basic Oars skills and the skillful use of listening carefully to your client. The third process in motivational interviewing is evoking. And evoking is defined as eliciting a client's own motivation for change. What you're evoking here really is change talk. So what is change talk? Well, change talk is defined as client speech that favors movement in the direction of change. Any kind of conversation that your client is giving you, any kind of statements about I want to change, I wish I could, the reasons are I will, I can, it would solve these problems and so forth, that's all change talk. Well, in motivational interviewing, we pay a great deal of attention to change talk. When we get it, we reinforce it, we encourage it, we try to get more change talk, because we know that the more a client engages in change talk, the more that they argue for change themselves, the more likely it is that they're going to change their behavior. So if we're not getting much change talk, then we want to do some things to encourage that, one of which is that you can just ask questions that would generate change talk. So here's some examples of a few questions that you could use to generate some change talk. Why do you want to make a change? What are the reasons, from your point of view, to make a change? What would some of the benefits be as far as you're concerned? How might you go about making the change if you wanted to be successful? How might you go about doing it? And what would be your first step, or what would be your next step, or what options do you see yourself having? So all of these would generate some change talk. The fourth and final process of motivational interviewing is the planning process. And planning is defined as developing a specific change plan that the client agrees to and is willing to implement. In using the 4 basic skills, the Oars skills, the skillful motivational interviewing counselor has already engaged the client, focused on a particular topic, elicited some change talk, and within that change talk there are not only reasons that the client sees for making the change and benefits that would accrue if they were to make the change, but also ways that the client could make the change and be successful at that. And these are important to pay attention to during those phases or those processes of motivational interviewing, so that when it comes to the planning phase, then it's just a process of going from a general concept to developing a specific plan. And the plan needs to be a SMART plan. It needs to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timed. And once you get a plan that is SMART, then that would be the end of motivational interviewing. So that's a brief introduction to motivational interviewing in a nutshell, so to speak. So I hope it's been useful to you and helpful. If you'd like further information, you're welcome to visit my website, www.motivationalinterviewingonline.com. And until next time we meet, I wish you joy and success in your work and peace and happiness in your life. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.
Okay, so in that video, you could see obviously the presenter there was referring to using motivational interviewing as a therapist or a social worker and working with a client. And a lot of the skills can actually transfer to your work as a peer educator and having conversations with people about the kind of work that you're doing. If people come to you with some concerns or some questions about their use or someone else's use, you can use some of these skills to have like a more productive and effective and compassionate and useful conversation with them. So I also incorporated a little bit of practice in our lesson here of the Oars. So of course, at the beginning of this video, you were in pairs to do the active listening practice. So the idea is to get into those same pairs and you'll be switching roles. So the person who was the sharer or the speaker the first time around will now be the listener, and they will practice using the Oars. So trying to use at least one of each while the partner tells them their issue, their problem, and the partner again will then provide some feedback. So as you may have noticed, the Oars are pretty similar, have a lot of similarities to some of those active listening skills. So we'll try to make sure that we're looking at open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries for this practice. So again, you can go ahead, if you're watching the webinar video, you can pause and go ahead and practice your motivational interviewing Oars skills. Now you are going to share something with me, and I'm going to practice some Oars skills. So go ahead.
Okay. So something that I've been trying to do lately is like build routines for myself. So like doing the same set of things after I get up in the morning, and before I go to bed, and then also building like scheduling into my habits. So like writing out my goals for the week and then figuring out which one or two things I'm going to be able to accomplish every day, and trying to hold myself to it. And I'm like doing all right. But then sometimes when it comes to like, especially after I get home from work, um, and it comes time to do one of the things that's on my list, I might not have the motivation to. So that's the problem that I've been running into.
Okay, so you've been like working on doing some daily activity scheduling, some routines, and that's been going okay. But like you've gotten some challenges, or you've had some challenges when it comes to actually like implementing some of the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so like, what sorts of activities have you been trying to work into your schedule?
So I've been trying to start every day by stretching, because I know it makes me feel good and it's also good for me. And then before I like get ready for work, I do a little bit of reviewing for the peer education certification, and then a little bit of work on one of the projects that I'm working on. And then like I get myself ready, take care of my pets, feed my plants, bike to work, work for a shift, and then bike home, and then do like a to-do list item, or like hang out with a friend or something like that. I also want to make sure that I'm getting at least three, or not at least three, but 3 meals a day, and like cleaning up my dishes and everything afterward.
It sounds like a lot.
Getting to bed at a certain time.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
And so it seems like you're really trying hard to be, have a routine and be organized and, take care of yourself, do all the things that like essentially being an adult is, right? So it seems like you're trying to do a lot, which is really good. And I can understand why there's some challenges, especially like since it's kind of a newer thing that you've been working on. I think the more that you can do it, the more, the easier it'll get over time. But definitely it's good stuff that you're doing.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a big adjustment, especially like coming from still trying to keep track of everything, but not having a routine, to kind of not having like steady, healthy habits to fall back on. I would lose a lot of things. So bit by bit, yeah, it's coming together.
Yeah, so having like those options already kind of listed out for what you can choose to do, rather than like picking something that may not be as healthy of an option, like, I don't know, just sitting and watching TV when maybe you could be doing some reading or some homework or something that you've decided is like a better option for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, cool. Well, great. Yeah, it sounds like you're doing some good stuff. So keep it up.
Thanks.
Cool.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for sharing. What was that like for you? Were you able to pick up on any of the Oars as we went through that?
Yeah. You asked an open question. You practice a lot of reflective listening, where you were like restating some of the ideas that I had conveyed to you. You affirmed me for like taking the steps toward like reaching my goal. And then there was like intermixed with those things, there was like summarizing of what I had told you.
Yeah. So now you've all had a chance to practice some motivational interviewing skills. Hopefully you've had a chance to also chat with each other about what that was like to go through that. And we're going to go ahead and move on. So one of the things that it seems a lot of SSDPers get, particularly peer educators, is having folks come to them with maybe having some concerns about either their own drug use or the drug use of a friend or a family member. So we wanted to touch base a little bit about what a peer educator might do in that situation in order to kind of help someone with that. So, and as a reminder, all of this information is in the resources in our Just Say No Peer Education Training Curriculum. So there's links to all of our resources there, including all of this information. So one of the first things is really considering all the factors and all the evidence that you have about the situation, so including all of the things that they have shared with you. So the first couple of points are really more for if you personally have some concerns about someone else's use. The remainder of these tips sort of encompasses if someone comes to you with concerns about their use. So just to kind of differentiate those here. So again, if you have a concern about someone's use, you want to consider all the evidence that you have. Maybe they've shared some things with you. Maybe you've observed some behavior or seen something that have caused you to be concerned about their use. So one of the first things that you would do is to make a plan to talk about that in a safe space. So in a place where you could feel that it's private and you can be able to be open in having that discussion. Again, and if others have been concerned about this person, that's another sort of factor, another piece of evidence that you have for that. If after you've sort of considered that evidence, you decide that you want to talk with them about it, that's where you want to be thinking about, where you might have this conversation. And you also want to be prepared to maybe have a negative reaction from that person. Because of stigma of drug use and, maybe the person doesn't feel that they have a problem, or maybe some of the information that you have is incorrect. They might feel challenged, they might feel confronted, they might feel judged. So you may, experience that kind of response from them. So you want to plan to have a talk with them and maybe approach them without judgment, of course, right? You want to try to be supportive and again, non-confrontational. This is not an intervention. That's not what we're going for here. We're trying to be supportive. And you want to try to talk to that person in a quiet, private environment at a time when maybe there's not going to be any interruptions or any distractions from other people, at a time where you can both be in a calm sort of frame of mind. And you want to talk to them about their use or their behavior by asking about areas of their life that it may be impacting. So for example, their mood, their work or school performance, their relationships, those sorts of things tend to be some of the first things that will be impacted negatively if someone's use is sort of getting to the point where it's a little bit more of a challenge for them to manage, or is getting to the point where maybe it's a little bit more chaotic. And, you want to also try to find out if they want any help to change their use. If they do, that's a great opportunity for you to be able to offer your support and help and discuss what you're willing and able to do to help them. It's also useful to already have some resources on hand. So if there's like a helpline number to a resource in your area that is useful, or maybe counseling or something like that you already know of in your area, just having that information already will be good, because if you have them in a position where they're feeling like they want that support and that help to get to that, it's almost always going to be better to be able to get that resource to them when they're in that feeling in that position, right? And so some place where they can maybe call for confidential support or to ask for more information. Again, you don't want to expect any sort of dramatic shift in that person's use or behavior right away. It may be the first time that they have even thought about it as a problem. It may be the first time anyone's brought it up to them. So just, a lot of patience and, sort of coming at it from support and love is a good spot to be. Okay. So then, so this kind of goes through the rest of this slide here. And like I said, they may not want help. They may not feel like they need support right now. If they, the reality is you can't make anyone change. And you want to avoid using any sort of negative approaches like lecturing them or making them feel guilty. You don't want to try to control them by bribing them or nagging or threatening or anything like that. You want to avoid using drugs with them, right? If it's something that you find is that you're feeling is a problem for them, you wouldn't necessarily want to essentially contradict that, and because that can be confusing. You also want to avoid taking on their responsibilities. Sometimes people will try to make up for, the things that their friend or family member isn't doing as a result of their use by kind of taking care of those things for them. But you want to try to avoid that because that can be something that you can talk to them about and sort of shows a way that maybe their drug use is impacting their life. You don't want to cover up or make any excuses for them. And you also don't want to deny their basic needs like food or shelter, anything like that, like taking things from them in that way is not going to be helpful. If the person does continue to use drugs or to practice any kind of behavior that may seem like it's risky or chaotic, you want to encourage them to seek out information. So maybe they're not wanting to talk to you about it necessarily, but at least having like a website or other resources where they might learn how to reduce the risks. So some harm reduction resources to reduce the risks associated with their use or behavior. So if the person is looking for some resources, you want to be able to provide them with a range of accessible options if they'd like. So it's useful for folks in the chapters to compile a list of resources that exist on campus or in your community for these purposes. So just having that available, maybe you create like a really nice like handout or flyer or card that you like make look really cute for your chapter to be able to hand out like while you're tabling that has those resources on it. That's a great option. And you want to include lots of different resources, keeping in mind that someone might not want professional help for lots of reasons, primarily stigma and discrimination. And really, it's ultimately the person's decision to get professional help. So being patient, be prepared to talk with them again in the future, particularly if the conversation went well. That means that they're open to talking with you about it. So they might come to you again in the future and talk with you more. And in the meantime, it's important for you to be able to set boundaries for yourself about what behavior you are willing and unwilling to accept from that person. And, kind of thinking for yourself, like what sorts of things you're able to offer to them and what sorts of things that you, don't want to. So for example, some people will put boundaries around like loaning money or around like times when they're available to talk or text with that person, just to really like maintain your own sort of like health and safety and boundaries while you're trying to help this person. Effective communication. So we've talked a little bit about some skills around that. And it's, you know, most importantly, staying calm and reasonable, right? You want to ask about their use rather than making assumptions. So, you know, I think oftentimes what can happen is people might have one kind of experience with that person using, or might have witnessed one, you know, thing that caused them to be concerned, but maybe that is something that's really out of character for that person. Maybe that's not how they usually use. So being willing to be open to asking rather than just assuming that that's how they use all the time, for example. You want to, when the person finishes talking, repeating back what you've heard. So those reflections, those summaries, like we talked about with the active listening skills and motivational interviewing skills. And again, it helps to clarify any misunderstandings, and it helps, again, them to know that they've been heard. You want to focus the conversation on the person's behavior rather than their character, right? So that's sort of avoid using you statements, so focusing on I statements. So like, I feel worried when you use this way, for example, or I feel, or instead of you make me feel worried, you know, so things like that, like making it something about how you are concerned with them rather than like saying that like your behavior is bad, you know. And you want to stick to the point, right? So focus on your concerns about their behavior. And you don't want to get drawn into any arguments or discussions about other issues. Again, not criticizing their use, and avoid using stigmatizing language, so not calling them an addict or other negative labels. We'll talk more about language and stigma in the stigma lesson of this training curriculum. So you'll get a little bit more knowledge about what that kind of thing looks like. And then with regard to making referrals to resources, again, having a clear understanding of the problem and of the need is really useful. So again, asking questions, helping them elaborate on the issue, and indicating your own understanding of it by reflecting helps to make sure that everyone's on the same page about the situation, summarizing what you hear so you know for sure what that need is. And discussing with them what maybe has worked or hasn't worked in the past at addressing their need, if it's something that they've kind of looked into before. And again, you want to be honest about your own limitations as a peer educator. You're not a counselor. Even though you may be super supportive and a really good friend, and really knowledgeable about a lot of things, that can sort of lead into the referral. So like knowing your own limitations, knowing what your boundaries are as far as how much and what you can do to help. You might get some pushback if the person isn't comfortable with something like counseling. And that's okay. Again, this is potentially challenging stuff for folks. So you want to summarize the problem as it's been described to you by the person and using it to make a case with compassion for that referral. You can choose a couple of different options for them, providing as much information about it as you can as to why it may be a good fit. So maybe you're thinking about referring them to the counseling center on campus, and you've actually gone there yourself. If it's something that you're open to sharing with that person, you could say like, I had a really good experience at the counseling center. I think it might be a good fit for you too. Something like this could be really could be the thing that really makes that case for you. If they're hesitant or they're anxious about following through, it may be just that they're like kind of scared to do this, right? This is kind of a scary thing to take the step to get help. You know, traditionally people like struggle to ask for help. So helping them, offering to help them connect to the resource with their permission, you know, maybe even walking with them to their first appointment, or being with them while they call to make their appointment, or even making their appointment for them. All of those are options that you can take if they're a little bit hesitant and need a little more support to get to that point. Okay. And as peer educators, we often talk about difficult topics, talking about someone's, mental health or drug use concerns. That can be really challenging. And, there's a lot of stigma and there's a lot of discrimination and there's a lot of, tough stuff that people discuss when it comes to these issues. And so I wanted to get, a resource that would kind of talk about doing just that. And obviously, abortion isn't necessarily the same as drug use, but it's similar in the sense that it is a challenging issue to talk about. It's something that people feel discriminated against about. It's something that people feel is highly stigmatized, and it's kind of a polarizing issue. So this TED Talk is about 10, 11 minutes, kind of talks about that. It talks about a better way to talk about abortion. And so I'll go ahead and play that for you now.
It was the middle of summer and well past closing time in the downtown Berkeley bar where my friend Polly and I worked together as bartenders. Usually at the end of our shift, we had a drink, but not that night. I'm pregnant. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, I told Polly. Without hesitation, she replied, I've had an abortion. Before Polly, no one had ever told me that she'd had an abortion. I had graduated from college just a few months earlier, and I was in a new relationship when I found out that I was pregnant. When I thought about my choices, I honestly did not know how to decide what criteria I should use. How would I know what the right decision was? I worried that I would regret an abortion later. Coming of age on the beaches of Southern California, I grew up in the middle of our nation's abortion wars. I was born in a trailer on the 3rd anniversary of Roe versus Wade. Our community was surfing Christians. We cared about God, the less fortunate, and the ocean, and everyone was pro-life. As a kid, the idea of abortion made me so sad that I knew if I ever got pregnant, I could never have one. And then I did. It was a step towards the unknown. But Polly had given me a very special gift, the knowledge that I wasn't alone and the realization that abortion was something that we can talk about. Abortion is common. According to the Guttmacher Institute, 1 in 3 women in America will have an abortion in their lifetime. But for the last few decades, the dialogue around abortion in the United States has left little room for anything beyond pro-life and pro-choice. It's political and polarizing. But as much as abortion is hotly debated, it's still rare for us, whether as fellow women or even just as fellow people, to talk with one another about the abortions that we have. There's a gap between what happens in politics and what happens in real life. And in that gap, a battlefield mentality, and are you with us or against us stance takes root. This isn't just about abortion. There are so many important issues that we can't talk about. And so finding ways to shift the conflict to a place of conversation is the work of my life. And there are 2 main ways to get started. One way is to listen closely, and the other way is to share stories. So 15 years ago, I co-founded an organization called Exhale to start listening to people who have had abortions. The first thing we did was create a talk line where women and men could call to get emotional support. Free of judgment and politics, believe it or not, nothing like our service had ever existed. And we needed a new framework that could hold all the experiences that we were hearing on our talk line. The feminist who regrets her abortion, the Catholic who's grateful for hers, the personal experiences that weren't fitting neatly into one box or the other. And we didn't think it was right to ask women to pick a side. We wanted to show them that the whole world was on their side as they were going through this deeply personal experience. So we invented pro-voice. Beyond abortion, pro-voice works on hard issues that we've struggled with globally for years. Issues like immigration, religious tolerance, violence against women. It also works on deeply personal topics that might only matter to you and your immediate family and friends. They have a terminal illness. Their mother just died. They have a child with special needs and they can't talk about it. Listening and storytelling are the hallmarks of pro-voice practice. Listening and storytelling, that sounds pretty nice. Sounds maybe easy, we could all do that. It's not easy, it's very hard. Pro-voice is hard because we are talking about the things that everyone is fighting about or the things that no one wants to talk about. I wish I could tell you that when you decide to be pro-voice, that you will find beautiful moments of breakthrough and gardens full of flowers, where listening and storytelling creates wonderful aha moments. I wish I could tell you that there would be a feminist welcoming party for you, or that there's a long lost sisterhood of people who are just ready to have your back when you get slammed. But it can be vulnerable and exhausting to tell our own stories when it feels like nobody cares. And if we truly listen to one another, we will hear things that demand that we shift our own perceptions. There is no perfect time and there is no perfect place to start a difficult conversation. There's never a time when everyone will be on the same page, share the same lens, or know the same history. So, let's talk about listening and how to be a good listener. There's a lot of ways to be a good listener, and I'm going to give you just a couple. One is to ask open-ended questions. You can ask yourself or someone that you know, how are you feeling? What was that like? What do you hope for now? Another way to be a good listener is to use reflective language. If someone is talking about their own personal experience, use the words that they use. If someone is talking about an abortion experience and they say the word baby, you can say baby. If they say fetus, you can say fetus. If someone describes themselves as genderqueer to you, you can say genderqueer. If someone kind of looks like a he, but they say or they're a she, it's cool. Call that person a she. When we reflect the language of the person who is sharing their own story, we are conveying that we are interested in understanding who they are and what they're going through. The same way that we hope people are interested in knowing us. So I'll never forget being in one of the Exhale counselor meetings, listening to a volunteer talk about how she was getting a lot of calls from Christian women who were talking about God. Now, some of our volunteers are religious, but this particular one was not. So at first it felt a little weird for her to talk to callers about God. So she decided to get comfortable. And she stood in front of her mirror at home and she said the word God, 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 over and over again until the word no longer felt strange coming out of her mouth. Saying the word God did not turn this volunteer into a Christian, but it did make her a much better listener of Christian women. So another way to be pro-voice is to share stories. And one risk that you take on when you share your story with someone else is that given the same set of circumstances as you, they might actually make a different decision. For example, if you are telling a story about your abortion, realize that she might have had the baby. She might have placed for adoption. She might have told her parents and her partner or not. She might have felt relief and confidence, even though you felt sad and lost. This is okay. Empathy gets created the moment we imagine ourselves in someone else's shoes. It doesn't mean that we all have to end up in the same place. It's not agreement. It's not sameness that pro-voice is after. It creates a culture and a society that values what makes us special and unique. It values what makes us human, our flaws and our imperfections. And this way of thinking allows us to see our differences with respect instead of fear. And it generates the empathy that we need to overcome all the ways that we try to hurt one another: stigma, shame, prejudice, discrimination, oppression. Pro-voice is contagious. And the more it's practiced, the more it spreads. So last year, I was pregnant again. This time, I was looking forward to the birth of my son. And while pregnant, I had never been asked how I was feeling so much in all my life. And however I replied, whether I was feeling wonderful and excited or scared and totally freaked out, there was always someone there giving me a been there response. It was awesome. It was a welcome, yet dramatic departure from what I experience when I talk about my mixed feelings of my abortion. Pro-voice is about the real stories of real people making an impact on the way abortion and so many other politicized and stigmatized issues are understood and discussed, from sexuality and mental health to poverty and incarceration. Far beyond definition as single right or wrong decisions, our experiences can exist on a spectrum. Pro-voice focuses that conversation on human experience, and it makes support and respect possible for all. Thank you.
Okay, so you can see how that video is sort of discussing what it's like to really communicate with each other and actually talk about and share with each other some of these difficult things and ways that we can do that, a lot of the ways that we talked about already in this lesson. Okay, and that brings us to our reflection questions for this lesson. So you can see that there are 3 different reflection questions. At least one that's going to refer very specifically to something that we were talking about. And the others that might be a little bit more broad, allow for you to do a little bit more critical thinking about the topic. So the first one is, what is active listening and what are some ways to practice active listening? The next one is, what are some helpful things to say in response to someone who comes to you with questions or concerns about their or a loved one's use? So say you're at a meeting and someone comes up to you afterwards and they pull you aside and have some questions about, how they might address a particular situation. And the last one is, how would you refer someone to a resource? Now, you can find the form online in the training curriculum document. So in that document, which you can find at ssdp.org/justsayno, at the top of each page, there's a link to that form, the reflection question form. So it's really easy for you to find, and you'll just use that form and scroll to the listening, responding, and referral skills lesson as your option for filling out the questions. If you have any questions at all about this lesson or any of our other Just Say No resources, please feel free to reach out to me at villemarie@ssdp.org. You can also find a lot of information about this program at our webpage, ssdp.org/justsayno. Thank you all so much for being here, and I appreciate you.